growth for EU at MoEngage, and I'm going to be the host for today's webinar. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be chatting with Saket Toshniwal, who's the head of CRM and product monetization and customer retention at Lovoo. I know Saket well because I've met him a few times, so I'll let Saket introduce himself, and then we'll get into the webinar itself.
Hello, everyone. I'm really glad that you all made it to this webinar. To very briefly give an introduction about myself, I'm Saket Toshniwal. I am the head of customer relationship management at Lovoo, based out of Berlin, Germany. But at this point, because of the coronavirus situation, I am in India, back home. So Lovoo, for those who don't know, is a social entertainment app with millions of users. I focus on product monetization, customer retention, and growth. I've earlier worked in product management, marketing roles, and building stuff for millions of people that millions of people have used. So on a side hustle this year, I'm consulting companies on how to successfully get started with CRM on your app, hire your new CRM team, and write quick wins so that you can increase your revenue. To learn more about me or to connect with me, you can check out on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I don't know whether you had some network, but I did. So let's switch the videos off and go to PPT, and then we can start.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's begin the chat, shall we? So how to set up CRM, and how do CRM teams succeed in 2020? You know, we understand that the negative impact that you can get from working in silos, how that can undermine customer experience, how that can make it difficult for you to work, even collaborate together. And it's important to break these silos down and allow data to flow freely from one to the other, which then also means that the user gets a seamless experience. So just to kind of get us going into this and to help us to, you know, get the users focused, or the listeners focused on this, why don't you just guide us through your basic approach and the tenets for setting up a CRM team? So why breaking silos are important, and what are some of the things that you follow when you want to break down those silos?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I would like first just make a disclaimer because I'm supposed to. So the opinions expressed in this presentation are solely mine and does not have any company opinion, and the company does not guarantee any reliability of the information. So because we are a stock listed company, we have to follow these, right? All right, so coming back to your question, why breaking silos is important. So we have all gone through that phase where you want to shine, and where the approach is, the problem is where everybody wants to shine, but things and then become slow and less transparent because people don't want to share things with other departments, probably because of X reasons and because they want to shine. And the cross-functional collaboration is really low. Like, you are then thinking whether you should give this project to somebody else or just take it. Was it good enough? And it takes even longer time. And the problem is also that people focus on problems rather than more solutions. And you focus more on doing the task rather than outcomes. So like task-driven, doing one task, then next task, and every day thinking about different tasks can be also problematic. So I frame it the opposite of this, is that as we are more solution-driven, where we want to get more things done, which is faster, highly transparent, cross-functional, and having cross-functional collaboration, not just within the first hand of departments, but also across different departments. And I will come to a lot of things and how can you become more faster, more highly transparent in the later part of our conversation. But I would say, like, let's start with the premise that having that customer and user centric is super important than just thinking about problems or just thinking about what product you have, and rather thinking what problems are you solving for those customers, and focusing on what outcomes do you want to drive from those tasks or the projects that you're driving is very important. Right. So having said that, breaking silos means free flow of information that focuses on achieving outcomes faster. So I want to say achieving outcomes faster is very important. And having a unified vision for team collaboration is also important, because I will come to in a bit like why CRM teams have unified values and vision for the team succeed much faster, and you work towards common goals by using collaboration tools. Now collaboration tools can differ from your company to company that you use, but it is important to use collaboration tools and not just emails, right? And communicating often and having a game plan to win faster in the market is also super critical, right? And yeah, that's about it, I would say.
I'm hearing a lot of messaging is in that, Saket. You know, if I were to
Right,
sort of put out a couple of things that I was hearing was that it is about, you know, making sure that we all talk about it, but customer centricity being more important than the individual worrying about, you know, what he can hold on to himself, but we're
right,
collaborating. So there's that part. I'm hearing stuff about values, you know, having a company value, and I'm also hearing that a lot of this is down to culture, building the right kind of culture.
right,
When you talk about collaboration, and given that situation we've got right now, particularly with the fact that we're remote working across countries, and even in country now, everybody's remote working, what are some of the tools that you're using then? You know, what are some of the things that CRM leaders should remember, particularly now?
right. So currently, because of the coronavirus situation, like I have come to India, so my team is in Germany working from home. Everybody's remote. So it is super critical that we collaborate in the most human way, yet in the virtual environment. So we use certain collaboration tools like Slack, Google Meet, Jira for transparency, like having those sprint and boards, and that stuff that needs to be prioritized, our weekly sprint planning, and then our Confluence for documentation. So, and I'm a big fan of Google Sheets. So we use Google Sheets a lot. And so internal tools that we have like Tableau for data visualization, and some one tool that I feel has helped in team recognition and appreciation significantly is Bonusly. So how is it different? So in a lot of companies that I've seen, people receive those quarterly reviews, quarterly feedback, yearly promotion. So basically you're working towards that time, and you're not constantly getting appreciation, but appreciation throughout the year. So which is super critical for at this specific time, because you're not getting those smiles on the corridor or the chats on the coffee machine, or even and everything is becoming more challenging. So this is exactly why employees are more pleased about digital recognition and encouragement. So more or less, all tools are enabler, but culture and values that create the team is what makes the difference. So, and I will come to in the later part what I think I have kept like values for the CRM team, and what has made us a significant difference as a team. Like, just to give you a simple thing, we are playing as a team, but playing as a team means we work as a team, we collaborate as a team, we play even Counter-Strike tomorrow as a team. We have coffee and lunch break tomorrow at the team on a Hangout call, because we want to have that thing of being together yet being distant, like at home, right?
Yep, that's making a lot of sense. And in point of fact, so we obviously have our remote working as well, and we're predominantly a sales team. So we're doing the stand-up thing, but I certainly haven't got into some of the recognition pieces that you're talking about. So I'll be looking at that, and I'm sure others will be inspired to look at things like Bonusly as well. And also that there's a classic giving people time to hang out together. So some really useful learnings in there for me. But moving on, let's focus on, you know, your sorts of teams. So let's talk about how, you know, how you organize a CRM team, what it should look like, and what are the business metrics that you think you should be using. And if you can also touch on whether you see that different by industry or company size, etc.
Right. That's a great question. And I would break it down into three parts. One, how does CRM team look like? So now, like CRM team in different companies and sizes looks different. But I will just say like some of the functional roles that is very important for a CRM team. Let's say the team captain, I would say, which you can name it as the head, the whatever, the lead, the whatever, the product manager. So these are the these are people who are strategizing, prioritizing, and leading the team to success. So basically making sure what needs to be done with the outcomes and that we are doing the right things. Then is the CRM campaign specialists, which are again doing campaigns, be it in push notifications, email, in-app, running experiments, optimizing campaigns, driving outcomes to actually get things done and ship the stuff. Ship means basically send out the stuff. Ship is a more product term. That's why, yeah, just so shipping out things more to the customers, and like sending out stuff to the customers. Then it's subject matter experts, which are analysts, data scientists, and email marketer. Email marketing is no more just a fancy email marketing thing. It has become much more technical than it used to be, I would say. It's you have to use a lot of tools to get rather not a lot of tools, few tools, but getting things done technically with those tools properly, right? And then copywriter, this is the person who writes, or the content editor, or the content creator. This is the person who creates the content for all the campaigns that you do. Then designer is super important, is that the designs the digital assets for your campaigns, or for your messages, or for your experiments that you're planning to run. And then QA, so do like testing all campaigns, test experiments before they are shipped to the users. Like it's super critical, like for Android, for iOS, and like it really matters that how different things work very differently for different platforms. So it's important to get the QA done, and QA should not be done by the person who uh, uh, like does the campaign orchestration. That person can do the check, but the QA should be external to give a second eye view, specifically when it gets released to millions of users. Then apart from that, cross-functional teams and collaboration is also important, because people do not just work with the same team or represent various, you work with different ideas for different teams to ship out different stuff. So it's important that you collaborate for product announcements and stuff like that from different teams to get things done in a cross-functional way, right? And you also mentioned, you asked about like how does different CRM team would depend on your business. So I define as like how what different businesses or business models need CRM teams. So this, I would say, these are the 9 types that require, but each business model has different metrics, specifically business and growth metrics to look at. So like for subscription, you would look at the MRR, ARR, and very important is compounded monthly growth rate. So where you check your total lost customers, which means cancel subscription in a given period, or the period of the total customer. So it's important that you're not just like growing your MRR by increasing your cost of acquisition, but also increasing checking on MRR to see that you're actually growing your customer base and your churn rate is lesser than your growth rate. Then marketplace model, it's important to check your GMV, net revenue that you're making. GMV is the total value. You will have these slides, so of course, and you can refer to this later. So if you want to refer to the marketplace model as like what are the metrics that you could have, but you're not having it right now, you could you can refer to this. But like checking out your user retention, your paid CAC, net revenue per compounded growth rate is also critical. Like, and also similar to your SaaS model, where your CRM is your customer success team or the content marketing team, where you're contributing directly or indirectly to your MRR, reducing churn, and getting more leads for your sales team, so that they can get they can contact more people and get more sales qualified leads, right? So I would say this is the main premise as to when you're looking at the different business models. But to say the metrics to focus on, I would say as a CRM team, you have to focus on revenue metrics. You have and revenue influencing metrics, something that is not directly focused on your is not a revenue metric, but indirectly influences revenue over a period of time, or even in a short run. Then the growth experiments metrics. This means how many experiments have you run, how many successful experiments have you run, what are the product campaigns that have been productized, and also your channel metrics. These are like your push open rates, email click rates, the push metrics, the in-app metrics, and your email metrics, and the other metrics as to how many pushable users have you contacted, how many of them are coming back. So with your channel. And one of the common mistake that I've seen is that focusing only on channel metrics, that some of this CRM team that is in the marketing department follows, which is they only have channel metrics, and then they have these nice presentation as to this much of engagement against a control group. But it's also important to have beyond channel metric. And yeah, the fancy metrics, I say it like stuff do not have metrics that you cannot really measure. Like there's so many people that come to me, hey, you can do probably this and run this campaign and your customers will be happy. My question to them is how will you measure the customers are happy, right? Yeah, you can always send out an NPS thing later, but only X percentage of your customers will respond to that. But X percentage of X percentage who have used your platform, that particular seen your campaign will actually see it. So it's important not to have just marketing driven stuff, but also more focusing on real core metrics, the product metrics, and avoid fancy metrics. Right. And when it when it comes to different size, I think it's important to understand that the different stages of the company have different phases.
Yeah, that's making a lot of sense. And you covered quite a lot of ground there. And again, thanks for coming on. I now clearly see why the disclaimer that you put out there, because you're giving a lot of information out. I guess a few things that I sort of jotted down just to sort of, summarize from my own perspective, but others will have other things, is that, it really was quite interesting when you spoke about email. Email is probably one of the oldest channels, right? And we've got all these new sophisticated channels, which are really exciting. We sell them and we're really excited. But what it's done is force people to get more sophisticated and more focused about how they use email. So I found that very interesting. The Q&A piece, let's make sure people aren't marking their own homework. Ensure Q&A really is QA. so QA, not Q and A, quality assurance, and also then about how the CRM teams are not all the same, right? So some situational planning, some situational thinking being important, and then lastly that whole about experiment and learn. So it's really strong points in there, and it kind of brings up a question for me that I'm sure most of the audience want to understand is what you see in these basic premises of the growth team, and then also then what do you see as the growth process and how growth teams should be set up.
Right. So like depending, that's really important, that like how you're setting up the growth team. But during the different sizes of the company, I would say that the growth team that you're setting up would change. So like for example, you do not need a growth or CRM team when you're a startup. A startup means, I define it as when you perceive when you have not achieved a product market fit, and when you're focusing on getting more revenue and paying customers and market share in that product market fit phase. And then I define it as post market fit phase, is that you have more, and your team is focusing on engagement and retention and revenue metrics, and you are really like during the growth phase, you're focusing on acquisition through referral, through activation and revenue metrics. And when it comes to enterprise, your customers, when you have large number of users and you are trying to engage different customers and having at each phase of the user life cycle, like from retention to engagement to revenue metrics, it's important to get set up, have the right setup of the team with the right uh, size, or I would say phase of the company. And when it comes to the growth process, I define the premise of growth process that you are creating the growth team to have less friction, and by less friction I mean you're creating it to for users to have the core value of your product as soon as possible, and you're accelerating those perceived value of your customer more and more, so that they stick to your product, they engage with your product more, and then you're indirectly influencing revenue and the growth of the revenue. And when it comes to the process of growth, I define it as very simple, like you have an hypothesis of what idea you want to focus on, what ideas you could have, then you prioritize those ideas on which you want to execute on, then you experiment on a specific chosen idea, and you analyze your tests to improve your ideas in the next iteration. And it's very critical that you actually document your ideas so that you can take back those learnings for the next experiment. That is important.
Sure. I mean, that's making quite a lot of sense. I'm seeing a growth model there that people can relate to. It's all about continuous improvement. It's about testing and iterating and learning from those, and also being prepared to do enough experiments so you can see where the failures are, but also where the opportunities are. So what should some of the goals be for these teams, though? And again, would it change by the vertical or by the size of the company?
Yeah, so I can say this by like growth teams in large companies differ a lot. Like I would say it can be an independent model or it can be a functional model. When it comes to independent models, like when I visited so how it's set up in Facebook is Mark has this VP of growth, and that person has different teams that focus in on signups, to acquire and get more users in the sign up funnel. In the sign up funnel during acquisition, getting more and more users activated. Onboarding is that for Facebook is having those first 7 friends so that they can connect with other friends and they see some perceived value. And then it's notifications. Facebook does a lot of notifications, and it becomes a big channel for them to get users hooked, coming back to the app again and again. So signups, onboarding and notification, this is again on a more independent model. But there are more again functional model where if it's in the part of the product, you are like focusing on signups, onboarding and notifications, but you have you're dealing like as a functional team across across the board for the growth culture. So in Facebook, you have is more independent, whereas in functional, it's across the product. You're running discoveries within your product cycle, but you need to focus on the most important objective within your companies to ensure that you're measuring the right valuable metric. So irrespective of which model you choose, and like building out this team doesn't just like help and doesn't happen overnight. So like you have to start small and narrow down your focus to the most important process when it comes to like looking at the team. So when it comes to the growth teams at the different size, I would say for startups, it's not required because you have not received your product market fit yet. You need your co-founding or the team or the early team is your growth team. You are small, you can be agile, and then for grown-ups, when you have received product market fit, it may be required depending upon whether your app is a consumer app or not, and depending on how much of like how much of users engagement do you have within the app. For in the growth phase, you definitely require, because as a growth team, you're focusing on the activation, acquisition, engagement part, and the early part of the funnel a lot. So and because you're spending a lot of money to get more users, you want to make sure that you're growing fast. And at enterprise, because you have different product categories, different revenue stream, and growth team is required uh, because if you do not have some product categories or product teams that are growing fast enough, enterprise can have a lot of silos that I mentioned to actually get your throughput. So and some of the metrics that I mentioned early on, like having those revenue metrics, focus on the core business value, knowing what your North Star metric is, and having that, and making sure that your growth team is providing those perceived value again and again to the customers.
Sure, got it. Again, a lot of value there, and quite a lot of ground. I think, without drawing too many parallels, because we obviously are looking to move into our growth phase now. One of our biggest challenges is about actually building those teams and having the right people in that engine, if you like, to drive things forward. Now, I'm pretty sure that you've been doing quite a lot of hiring recently, so maybe you can help us all with a bit of what your key learnings are and kind of what processes you use around that to ensure that when you build that growth team, you've got the right people that actually carry on that what you started out with.
Right, right. So this is really interesting because very recently I hired a lot of people like in my team, and rather I would say I've gone through, like, there was a time when I was like interviewing a lot of people to get that great team, but and it's super critical to have uh, that high velocity team to so that you succeed in the company and as a team, and also it becomes a happy workplace. So I define it starts from job description, and job description is something that I say that should be made by the manager and not by the recruiter. And you should always have the team fit criteria within your team. Like, I try to describe the team culture in 3 to 4 words that I'm looking for within the team. And whatever I choose, I try to see whether the person in the interview process have those checks in those checks in those team culture or not. So when it comes to I have defined it as a job description as role canvas, where you literally write down what is the purpose of the role, why does the role exist, after all, and what like this defines the premise as to what is the cost of not having that role probably. So why does it totally exist? And then accountability is what outcomes is the role responsible for, or the person would be responsible for the activities and the techniques, the job to be done on the tasks the person has to do, and the responsibilities of that person would be doing in order to fulfill those accountabilities. Then behaviors, I would say these are key capabilities which you have already defined as team fit. What characteristics should the person possess, or elements that the person would bring to the team, which is probably missing, is also important. Then your first 120-day plan. So the projects and the activities that the new hire would focus on the first 120 days after joining. So this is also very important, because sometimes I've seen like, okay, you need a person probably for this jobs and responsibilities, but the manager doesn't have clarity on what would the person do in the first 120 days. So it's also important to write these things down. And then the success metric. How will you measure success in this role? Like, and you cannot have like 1000 success metrics, but rather focusing on just 4 or 3 of them, and then having narrow it down as to if the person follows those accountabilities and responsibilities, then the person is achieving those success metrics. And during the process, it is important that you have that skill assessment to minimize the bias. So, and I send out sample tasks to for people who are applying for the job. So this weeds out several candidates who who look good on paper, but not are actually good at work, and also weeds out like who might not be that good at paper but are really good at the sample task. So then you can actually take on the hiring interview while deciding on which of the candidates you want to interview. And during your interview process, I highly recommend to have team interviews, because interviewing can be so subjective and is prone to bias. Like, you will improve your odds much more of making good decisions when you have multiple perspectives, and making sure that your team interview is also you take feedback from your team uh, in a in a way that that is again unbiased, so that you can make the right decision. And I always say, while making this decision, you always think that you should, given that situation, if you're not dying to hire the person, don't make an offer. So when I say this, I try to answer these following questions um, to make sure that I'm hiring the right person, or giving the offer to the right person. This means, would that person increase the team velocity? Does that person add complementary skills to the team? Does this person be able to fulfill the purpose of the role? And does that person fit in the job description as described in my point second with accountabilities and job description? Would the person will be able to solve problem when I tell him what to do? Like, it's important not to just hire people uh, and then teach, open a training school. Don't open a training school, tell them how to do things. Rather, that person should be hungry to learn and should be coachable, so that the person can figure out how to do things once you tell them what to do. Maybe first few iterations you might have to tell them the processes and how to do, but the person should be capable of, or rather coachable, to learn how to do things. um, and does the person fit in the team values? This is super important, because like there's so many teams that who just do not who do not even have team values. And like I say that if you do not have team values, you just miss out on a lot of things. Like for us, it's important that the team is playing and like playing as a team, being accountable, like moving fast and creating outcomes, and sharing and learning and sharing what they learn. So like that brings transparency and even more throughput in the team, right?
Again, super useful, and again, a lot of ground. A couple of things I would summarize again here would be particularly like the conversation about how you look at qualitative and quantitative elements for your recruiting. The transactional piece in terms of the skill sets they bring to the table, but also then what they bring from a cultural perspective. And then that makes that opposite sense then, that if you then involve the team in the hiring process, that's going to fast track them sitting in, it's going to validate your own thinking, it can make you making good decisions. And that really important thing, which sometimes is hard to do, but needs to be done, is to set people clear parameters and clear objectives, but give them lots of space to go out and do it and actually grow within the role. So some really useful things there, and I think some actionable things that people take away as well. Okay, so fantastic insights that I've already just said. But how do you sort of prioritize then? How do you choose between different growth strategies moving forward?
So when you come to different growth strategies, it's important that you that you look at different parameters. So when I go look at different growth strategies, I look at the impact on the outcome metric. So what is it that like what outcome metric am I trying to drive, and how much of impact will it have? 1%, 5%, 14%, and depending on the control group, right? And then giving some hypothesis behind the numbers that I'm trying to drive. What is the reach of that specific experiment or the campaign that I'm trying to drive? How many users it will reach? Is it 100, 100,000, or 1,000,000, or even more? So so this is very important. When you look at reach, you have to not just see that what is your segment size or the audience size, but if you're looking, you also have to deep dive into channel. Like if you look at push, how much of users in your segment are pushable and are falling into that segment or category audience size in order to do that particular experiment. If you're looking at email, how many are subscribed or how many are engaging users that you can actually do that experiment from that. If you look at a product feature like a user interface variable testing, then you look at like how much of a reach, in-app reach does that particular view or a trigger point have. Then when you look at effort versus time, this is also super important because every experiment requires effort and requires time. So time to market is like, does it take 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks? It should not, like, no experiment. Doing an experiment should take more than 8 weeks because then it's not an experiment. And then effort is important because it requires developers' effort, your effort, time effort, and opportunity that you're missing out of not doing it, or not doing some other experiment. And then you look at risk. You can probably do something. You can think that it'll do good, but it can also do bad. So there's high risk of doing something. You can think it increases 50%, but it only increases 2%. That means your assumption to your impact was wrong. So it's important to measure your risk as well. And risk, let's say, if you send out too many push notifications in a campaign, and then your risk is people will opt out, and then you cannot reach out to them. Or same goes for email. And when it comes to experiments, it's also important to prioritize the ones that has more company focus or the quarterly goals or has your product vision. So knowing your vision and also making sure that your metrics that you focus on is aligned to your quarterly goals. And the thing that I mentioned, when you analyze, you're taking down those notes of your learnings. So it's important to know your previous learnings or even your previous Jira tickets where you have done certain experiments, like documenting them to actually figure it out whether you should do it or not, or which of these A or B will be more successful.
Got it. Got it. So just one thing on that element, Saket, I would just question. So how would you assess something like opportunity cost? It's a term that people hear, but a lot of people
Right.
don't actually work with. I see often that people mention the word, but there's no real science. But can you just give us a little insight into how you assess opportunity cost?
Right. So I would say for opportunity cost, if you have two ideas that let's say, let me give an example. Two ideas that can increase more sign up, more completion of your registrations of the users who have installed in your app. Uh, but idea A takes more time to do it, but and could have lesser risk, uh, can have more impact, but you on the other hand, idea B can be done like very quickly within a week or 2 weeks, and then you can reach. But your reach is high, and your previous learning says that this is possible, but maybe your impact is low. So you may prioritize idea two toward idea one, depending upon whether you want to achieve achieve the success faster and get some learnings for idea two to implement later, or you want to give it a big ship thought and like experiment the idea two, idea one first. So I would say defining opportunity cost is the cost of not doing an idea or not experimenting an
Right.
idea.
Right. Got it. Got it. Again, thanks again. Look, so a lot of very practical stuff in this, and I think one of the things that we, as we get to this new way of working, then some of our normal practices will settle down, but at the moment people are still making that transition. So, can I ask if there's like, before we get into open up for the audience for Q&A, is there one piece of advice that that you'd give to CRM team managers on how they can prepare to bounce back?
Absolutely. I think this is a great one because this situation that we are going through right now, we are battling together of pandemic where everybody is at home, working from home, still trying to collaborate. I would say, uh, like, I would say the three things that if you do, like the first thing I would recommend is to communicate to your users in an uh, emotionally sensitive manner, because uh, right now your users have a lot of free time, or your customers have a lot of free time because they're probably at home, and so people can consume a lot of content. That's why Netflix, they're consuming more. So this is okay to communicate more, but don't be pushy on squeezing money out of the customers. And secondly, it's important to see that this pandemic could be actually a long time. So if it hits your stock price, sales, or earnings, uh, it and but as a CRM team or managers, you have to create even stronger bond with your customers at this time. It is important, as I mentioned earlier, that customer centricity at this time, it becomes even more important. And when it comes to your team, supporting your team at this period of loneliness by doing fun activities together, such as like coffee and hangout, digital recognition, online games, digital lunch break together, sharing photos by of your home office desk, or even like sometimes like cracking silly funny jokes, yet getting that participations from everybody. And it's important that when you come back as a team or together after this pandemic, when you're coming back, you have a plan and strategy just even before of the possible scenarios before you come back, so that if it's needed to be physically together to implement that, you're there together. So to summarize, communicate more with your customers because they are ready to consume your content. Communicate more with your team in more human way, yet digitally, and have a plan and strategy for things for you to come back across different scenarios, so that you can grow even faster, or companies that have gone down, you can have an accelerated growth rate.
That's great, Saket. Thanks very much. Some really, again, great content. And I'm really buying into the whole thing about being present, being relatable, being humane. I'm building relationships now, which has an authenticity which we could then capitalize on later. So loved all of that. Look, it's great. Thank you again for giving up your time, and also everybody online. Still happy to take any questions. Whilst people are thinking about questions that they might want to ask, couple of things that you mentioned, Saket, was about North Star metrics. Give us a couple of give some context to that, sort of the kind of North Star metrics you think growth teams should be working on.
So North Star metric is just to say in a very simple word, words, is something that is a metric that that brings your core value of the product and your business metric together. Like, let's say for LinkedIn, it is quality engaged users. So now they have defined what does quality mean, what are the metrics relating to quality, what does engagement means, what are the things relating to engagement, and what does users mean, what does members mean. And they have defined it between premium members and non-premium members. So, and business members, so because they have different kinds of members, so they want to maximize on their North Star of this. So it's important that when you're running your experiment, you're trying to bridge that gap of your business and your the product value that you're trying to perceive to the users, that your users are perceiving together.
Okay. I can't say. Okay. And again, how can sort of technology bridge the gap between growth and CRM teams?
Oh yeah, that's a brilliant one. I would say you have to use tools. You have to use CRM tools. You have to use tools to communicate to users, to run experiments, to see your data, visualize your data, to figure out. And I would say that it's becoming much more scientific than an art, because you have to see which of the users are recently active, frequently active, monetary specific active, and you have to find out those specific segments and those specific interactions to send out to users, so that they can actually come back more often, and you can communicate more in a more sophisticated way, that all your users are not overwhelmed with all the communication. So I always crack this joke that it's very easy to do CRM wrong, and it's as much difficult to do it perfectly.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. A couple more questions that are coming from the stream. So what about the startup environment? There's a few people from startups here saying, when it's not possible to have such a CRM team structures, I guess the question is, are there any little tactics you can use when you are literally in the startup mode?
Yeah, so I would say when you're a startup mode, it's important to know that what is your business model, what is your business model, and this then figure out what are the core metrics for the business model that you wanna grow. And then it's important that you focus on those early customers as to how to communicate to them, even like how to communicate to them more, uh, and get even more feedback from those customers, yeah, early on, and even more often. So as a startup, I would say when you do not have a CRM team, just do the basic, like the push notifications, like the email as a channel, like communicating different segments like cart abandonment, or like the paywall cancel or recovery emails, and all those sort of, where like the onboarding email, or one of the things that is really important is planning out your user lifecycle or customer journey, if and then sending out campaigns at different customer journeys. So yeah, just a bunch of things.
So we've got another one, couple coming through. So with the startup that's migrating from startup into growing, what kind of downfall do you see to be cautious of when developing that strategy across life stages, either activation, on board, and the lagging, ending, etc.? So directly related to the previous question, but what are the downfalls that you can see when you're going from a starter to growing one, if you're being too cautious about those strategies?
So I would say startup moving to a growing phase is, now that you have achieved your product market fit, and now that you want to grow uh, it to that, so that more and more users can uh, can be acquired and given that perceived value of that product market fit, you have to focus on, so the pitfalls that you will encounter are uh, focusing on too many things and deviating from what has been derived as product market fit, communicating to users uh, in a way that uh, it is not what your early adopters showed it. And as you go on to more customers, you are trying to capture more and more of market. So it's important to not just focus on the early part of the funnel, which is acquisition and activation, but also towards your retention, so that you have a U-shaped retention curve and you have more and more and more users coming in.
Sure. Cool. So there was just one more question, but I think it's actually more for clarification. And the last two answers you've given have covered it off. It said that that you had initially mentioned that a startup doesn't need a CRM or CRM team, and the person goes on to say they strongly disagree because they always want to have the customer-related data in one place, and that's where they can make good decisions. If you don't start with it one place, then you obviously can, in the future, can't align your strategies. Based on a lot of things you've already said, I think what we're saying is that there's a growth team, which is not just a CRM team, and the CRM team is always important. Would that be right?
Right. That's right. I would also say, like, a startup can need a growth team can need a CRM team, as long as a startup has that product market fit. If a startup has achieved that product market fit within 6 months of starting up, then it would need, like, so it may not need a team, but it needs CRM activities. Like, it needs to send out emails to customers. It needs to send out campaigns for cart abandonment, for paywall cancel, for winning back customers, for getting more referrals. So CRM is required, but I'm not saying, what I'm trying to say is that, depending, if you have not achieved your product market fit, then you don't need a big massive team of 12 people.
Great. Thanks very much. Look, I'm going to wrap it up now. Again, Saket, thanks very much for joining us today and being so generous with your time.